So, John Lennon was probably one of the greatest revolutionaries, visionaries, and a real genius. And this song, Imagine, was one of his best works and probably one of the greatest songs ever written by any person on this planet. And he said, "You may think I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will live as one. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one." And he was talking about me, because I'm not a dreamer about peace. I know about peace, and I know that peace is possible. Now, here's the really strange thing. When Olivia called me to speak at TEDxStellenbosch, it was just a strange coincidence about peace and about me being part of peace. 30 years ago, South Africa was in the middle of a civil war. We were in a state of emergency. I was the president of the student council at the University of Durban-Westville and a member of the South African National Students' Congress, SANSCO. And we were called by the SRC of Stellenbosch University. And they asked us to come to Stellenbosch, 1986, to come to Stellenbosch and dialogue with our counterparts on the right. A group of left-wing black students were asked to come and dialogue with their right-wing counterparts, the Afrikaner Studentenbond and Jeugrak, here in Stellenbosch. And we debated at length amongst ourselves about whether we would come here or not. And then we decided that we have to, because in the future, we have a common destiny, both black and white. And we got on a plane. We did not ask for a mandate from our student body because we would not have got it. So we got on a plane and we came here to Stellenbosch. There were a group of about 20 of us. Now, many of them are now very prominent in government. And we lived in a place called, they put us up in a residence called Helshoogte. Does it still exist? Okay, so that's where we stayed, Helshoogte. And we dialogued. Martinus van Schalkwijk and Henny Bester and all the rest of them. And we had 2 days of dialogue here in Stellenbosch. So it's really, really coincidental that I come back almost 30 years to talk about peace at a time when you have some really serious problems here at Stellenbosch. But we dialogued in the middle of a civil war. We're not in the middle of a civil war today. We did what the world thought was totally impossible. Now, I don't know. I'm going in the other direction. I hope the country's not going in the other direction. We did what the world thought was totally impossible. We made peace. The students that came here to Stellenbosch, we were followed by many academics, business people, lawyers, doctors, who started to cross the divide. And less than a decade later, we made peace. Nobody in their lifetime, in our lifetime here, thought that that was going to be possible. But we made peace. In 1992, I established this institution called the African Center for the Constructive Resolution of Disputes, ACCORD, to manage conflicts in Africa because I was inspired by what we did here in South Africa. It's an NGO. It's the largest in Africa today. We have about 80 full-time people, and we work across the continent. Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We're in Mali, we're in the Central African Republic. We're also in Syria, in Palestine, in Sri Lanka. We've taken the African experience and we've shared that, but more so we've taken the South African experience and we've shared that of how we have made peace here in South Africa. I've sat down with warlords in Somalia. I've trained rebels in Burundi. The president of Burundi is a student of mine. I've trained rebel leaders in the Congo. I've sat down with perpetrators and victims of violence and war. I've seen thousands of young people being killed. I've seen families being displaced. And this is to feed the narrow interests of rebel leaders, politicians who politic for power, not for people, and companies who plunder for profit. The cell phone that the guy talked about in the previous video, and he said we have gold in the cell phone. He's right. But also in that cell phone is coltan. And 65% of the world's deposits of coltan sit in the Congo. And it's at the center of the conflict. Profit, plunder, that's what it is. Now, I've been inspired by all those young people in Africa who have been victims of war, and I'm inspired by children. And these two young guys, Olan and Kenzo, they're sitting here in front. Say hi. You've seen them roam around outside. So Olan and Kenzo are my inspiration. Olan and Kenzo are 3 years old, and in 20 years' time, they will be the same age as many of you in the room here today. And Olan and Kenzo may be traveling in driverless cars, and they may be receiving their pizzas and their books via unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones as they call them today. They may wonder about this little instrument. They may think it's very strange that you have this in your hand and you have to make a phone call using this. And they'd say they were very primitive, because they may just have to think about a phone call and they will make the phone call in the future. It's not impossible. It's happening right now. On TED Talk, they're discovering those things. So Olan and Kenzo, but they share the planet today with 7 billion people. In the future, when they're 23 years old, Olan and Kenzo will share the planet with 8.3 billion people. 1.3 billion more people than we have today. People who will need more food, more clothes, more cars, more of everything. That's the life that Olan and Kenzo will have in the future. 20 years ago, if I told any of you there was going to be Facebook and Twitter, and there was going to be this instrument that has more power than that was put on the moon in the 1960s. This has more power. You would not have believed it. But we have it today. And 20 years ago, there were 6 billion people on the planet. So what am I talking about? There are two things that will shape Olan and Kenzo's lives as they go forward. And they're smiling. Technology and population growth. For centuries, that's what shaped our lives. As our populations grow, we have more needs. And just consider this. It took us from the beginning of humanity until 1804 to reach 1 billion people on the planet. It took 123 years to reach the 2nd billion people on the planet. It then took, listen carefully, it then took 12 years to go from 6 billion to 7 billion people. In the next 13 years, we will have another billion people on the planet. Why 1 additional year? Because growth rates are dropping in some parts of the world. But still, 13 years, another billion people on the planet. But technology always comes to our rescue. So our ancestors, the hunter-gatherers who went around picking berries, had very few people on the planet. And they could manage just going around and picking berries. But as they got to 1 billion people and more, they needed to feed all of those people. And the discovery of iron ore allowed us to move into the agricultural age, because we could fashion implements and we could move into large-scale farming. And several hundred years later, when we were a few more billion people on the planet, we needed to make sure that we could feed all of those people, and we invented the steam engine, and hence came industrialization, and we could feed, we could clothe, and we could take care of people on a mass level. And today, as we travel across the world and as we trade across the world, we've invented the microchip to allow us to communicate instantaneously. Going into the future, nanotechnology and quantum computing is going to allow us enormous possibilities into the future. So the life that Olan and Kenzo are going to lead in the future has enormous possibilities. And here's the great thing. Although things look so bleak when you put your television channels on and you see war in Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq, and you see the migrants in Europe scrambling to get over a fence, and you see a little child dead on the shores of Turkey, we're still a better place in the 21st century than we've ever been. We're more educated, we're more healthy, we're more wealthy. These are all the positive statistics of the 21st century. But at the same time, we have more inequality in the world. Listen carefully. 85 people, 85 people, the richest people in the world, have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion people. 85. 1% of the people in this world own the same amount of wealth as 50% of the other people of the world. They control 50% of the wealth of the world. Inequality. Climate change. The ice caps are melting. Permafrost is melting. Sea levels are rising. We're on an unsustainable path. I read 2 days ago, El Nino will be upon us in October. But for the first time in history, El Nino is occurring whilst the polar ice caps are melting. And so those who can predict El Nino don't know for certain what the effects of El Nino are going to be. So we've had a 3-year drought in California, and we're going to have huge flash floods in California. But they don't know the extent of it because of the coincidence of the two things. Unemployment, refugees and displaced people, and internal conflicts, all are up. So the progress that we've made in the 21st century does not outnumber the challenges that we face in the 21st century. We're in a race against time. Therefore, global peace is necessary. That's why we need global peace. We need more spaces for cooperation. Here in Stellenbosch, there out in the G20, in the United Nations, we need more spaces for cooperation. We need less spaces for competition and conflict because this is a race against time. Now, there are spaces for cooperation. The International Space Center, a collaborative effort among several nations in the world to find solutions to the problems of humanity. And believe it or not, even though the Americans and the Russians are conflicting in Ukraine and NATO is there, the same nations are cooperating. These are the same nations, Russia, Japan, China, the United States, Canada, all of them are cooperating to find solutions for humanity. Scientists around the world are coming together. The Large Hadron Collider between Germany and Switzerland, another collaborative effort amongst nations across the world. So competition and collaboration. And we have people coming together across the world. Doctors Without Borders, Lawyers Without Borders, Mediators Without Borders. And I heard last week, and I will be hosting in a month's time, the former foreign minister of Finland in Johannesburg, at the University of Johannesburg. He is part of a group called Historians Without Borders. Borders will be a fiction in the past. They're a fiction today. Young people who are connected to the internet don't know about borders. So what do we need in the future? We don't need a leader of the United States. We don't need a leader of China. We don't need a leader of Russia or India or South Africa or Brazil. We don't need a leader of the East or the West. We don't need a leader of the North or the South. We need leaders for humanity. We need leaders who will know that we have a common destiny. Like that decision that we had to take in 1986 when we sat down and said, do we go to Stellenbosch to talk to our white counterparts? We knew we had to go because we had a common destiny in this country. We were in a race against time here in South Africa. And for those of you who are of an age where you can remember 1985 and 1986, you will know we were in a race against time. We had to decide, do we continue competing, or do we come together and fashion a common destiny? And today, do they need to be fighting in the Ukraine? Do they need to be fighting in the South Sea, China? Do they need to be fighting in South Sudan? They don't. Because the progress that we have made is being outsmarted by the challenges that we will face in the 21st century. And we owe it to Ola Nenkenzo to ensure that we have leaders who will go and engage in politics without patronage. We want to have companies that will engage in profit without plunder. And we want to ensure that protesters will protest without prejudice. This is what we need in the 21st century. We need a new world, and that's why I've decided, having worked for the last 23 years in managing conflicts across the continent, having been in a conflict in this country, South Africa, and believing what John Lennon believed, that someday you'll join us. I came here today because I want to ask you today to join me in an initiative I've just launched called Global Peace. Global Peace is an initiative that we hope we're going to take across the world to create new spaces for cooperation. And I've decided to launch it here at TEDx because TEDx and the TED community is a community for cooperation globally. It's scientists, it's artists, it's academics, it's radio announcers who are coming together to create spaces for cooperation. He has an important job, Corder, because Corder's voice reaches thousands of people every day, and Corder shapes opinions. He needs to create spaces for cooperation, Corder, not use that instrument for spaces for competition. We have to take these instruments and use them as spaces for cooperation, not spaces for competition, not spaces for conflict. They can be our solution to the future, or they can be the destruction of humanity. The choice is ours, and this is why we distinguish ourselves from everybody else, from every other animal that inhabits this planet. We have choice. And I ask you today to choose cooperation, not conflict. So, global peace. Imagine it. And for 1 minute, indulge me and take a look at this.
And I might be in love. If I'm lucky, I'll be learning. Keep the wheels turning. Even drive my own car. In 10 years' time, I may live with room to move. Running water, a roof above my head. I may be struggling to make ends meet. To buy milk and bread and those little pink sweets. I don't know about the leaders I'll have to follow. the rules they'll put in place, what will become of my human race? Do I also have to worry about the world you're leaving for me?
Thank you.